most of Africa, people can connect and send a text. In many instances, even send a little WhatsApp, have a little short phone call. And at this point of connectivity where you're simply saying, I've arrived in my home after a long journey, I would like to get 10 bags of rice tomorrow. And, this kind of communication and how are you doing, grandma in the village? This is transformative. And the telcos get a lot of credit for having made that possible. And that simply was not possible 30 years ago. And it has improved the lives of Africans in many ways. But the technology that allowed that to happen, ironically, is now in some ways the impediment to broadband. Is the migration from rural to the cities. This also is talked about a lot, but I truly believe that this is a major issue because people come, I can speak for Nigeria, people come to the cities blindly, just saying, I think that I can find something here. And to the extent that people feel like they can stay in their areas where they live and make a living, I think it will really help with this, I think, very destructive move to the cities, which then have issues of security. Infrastructure cannot handle them all. So I think to the extent you have a good connection, in whatever you're doing, it means you're more likely to stay where you are. Infrastructure in Africa continues to be a big problem. If you want a distribution business, you don't have great roads. Electricity continues to be a challenge. Governments continue to have problems of high inefficiency for any number of reasons. So what Nigerians have been able to do with connectivity, I think, in the entertainment industry is fascinating. The things around healthcare and the ability to get healthcare, in the West, so much of healthcare now is through, they are trying to discourage you from coming to the hospital if you can. You have for $20 a month, you can get basic healthcare through Amazon. Amazon is in the health business now. All that is enabled through connectivity. So I think that there are so many ways that providing that will no question improve the lives of Africans. And then, of course, like people say, the devices themselves. I mean, this is also an elephant in the room. You need your device to be able to be charged, and you need the device at a price that can be reached.
So welcome everyone. Welcome to the 2025 season of Africa Tech Talks. This year, we're diving deep into the transformative world of technology across the continent, from foundational infrastructure like subsea cables, data centers, and telecoms to cutting-edge advancements in artificial intelligence and also venture capital. We'll be hosting incredible guests who are shaping Africa's tech future. Today, we're thrilled to kick off with a true pioneer in Africa's digital transformation, Mr. Diseye Isoun. The director of Content Oasis Limited in Abuja, Nigeria, he has been instrumental in redefining connectivity and driving digital innovations across the continent. His remarkable career includes playing a key role in the establishment of Galaxy Backbone, NITDA, and Nigcomsat, as well as founding Content Oasis, a company that is dedicated to extending connectivity to underserved areas. His visionary efforts have even earned recognition from the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, which awarded $1 million of grant for groundbreaking feasibility study on broadband expansion in remote regions. With decades of experience and an unwavering commitment to bridging the digital divide, Mr. Isoun brings invaluable insights into Africa's connectivity challenges and opportunities. Thank you, Mr. Diseye, for joining us today. Thank you.
And thank you for having me. And I sound pretty good when you describe it that way. So it's great. Thank you.
We try our best, but the hard work has been done on your side.
Yes, thank you very much. Looking forward. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go straight for my first question for you, which is regarding the digital divide, that we have in the continent, right? So, in your opinion, what are the key challenges to broadband access in rural Africa, where only 15% of residents have internet access compared to 50% in urban areas? And how can local ISPs and satellite providers like, for instance, Elon Musk Starlinks, collaborate to drive successful connectivity initiatives, especially in regions where the cost of laying fiber can go up to $30,000 per kilometer, right? So it ranges between 15 to 30, according to some studies.
Yes, no, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think a little background is helpful about how we got to where we are. In the 2000 timeframe, approximately, Nigeria specifically deregulated its telecom industry. And as part of that, some investment came into the country. The most known and most shared information on that is the MTN investment. They decided, and they get credit for taking a kind of big leap in Nigeria and buying a universal access license, as they call it back then, for what was a fair amount of money. And that was the beginning of telecommunications as we know it today. And where has that brought us? It's brought us to a place which is quite impressive, I still think, in the sense that across most of Africa, people can connect and send a text. In many instances, even send a little WhatsApp, have a little short phone call. And at this point of connectivity where you're simply saying, I've arrived in my home after a long journey, I would like to get 10 bags of rice tomorrow. And, this kind of communication, and how are you doing, grandma in the village? This is transformative. And the telcos get a lot of credit for having made that possible. And that simply was not possible 30 years ago. And it has improved the lives of Africans in many ways. But the technology that allowed that to happen, ironically, is now in some ways the impediment to broadband, because the technology that allows for what let's say, voice networks, as they were called, also have a tendency to be very expensive to roll out in rural areas. The technology benefits from density. So the simple mathematics that a telco has to do is, if I spend money on this base station here, will I make enough back to get my money back? And the math on that says you may not want to do that in a rural area for broadband, because there's not enough money to make when it comes to broadband. But at the same time, in Africa, 90 to 98% of all broadband is through mobile devices. Whereas in the developed countries, the number is something like 35% is out of mobile and 65% out of more traditional fiber, ADSL. So the old phone lines were converted to ways to get broadband to the homes. So there's less dependence on broadband via mobile. And so my little proposition, having been running around trying to connect the unconnected for a while, is there will need to be some paradigm shifting change in the way in which the business of connectivity occurs. If we're ever to be able to make broadband spread the way a phone call spread in Africa, 20 years ago. So I hope that sort of gives a good context.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that stayed with me on the investment side was precisely the density part, right? So when these major companies do and look where they should provide their services, of course, the density of population that you have on a certain region is key in order to do these investments. So that brings me to the next question. The role of the government or the policies that the government can put into place in order to better, give internet access to the populations. So how can really government policies incentivize broadband investment and support local ISPs, right? To provide affordable access, considering that broadband penetration in African countries are at least fixed. The fixed one is so little, right, compared to the mobile one. So majority of people have access to mobile, to broadband, but mobile, right, in the mobile version, not so as the fixed one. And what successful combining this, what successful regulatory frameworks like Kenya's national broadband strategy could Africa adapt to accelerate the digital transformation? So what is the role of the government here and the policies that the government can put into place to incentivize this?
Yes, again, unfortunately, a little context is probably important, which is the ITU, the International Telecom Union, creates a set of regulations worldwide that have been important in the success of connectivity in places like Africa, because the countries are forced to work under that global regulatory system, and I think that has helped. However, that same system includes certain characteristics that are beneficial to voice companies and need big national investments. So, to be very specific, let's take 4G and 5G. This regulatory regime says if you want to do 4G in Africa or Nigeria or the UK or 5G, you have to buy a frequency license, right? And those frequency licenses are national. And a frequency license in Nigeria was sold to companies for $256 million each, for example, just for the frequency. So you haven't rolled out any CapEx yet, capital expenditure. You haven't spent any marketing money. This is just for the frequency. And so if you do that, the question then becomes, and these same frequencies and investments work best in dense areas. And also we are chasing technology that we may not need to chase, but because it's global, you have to, Nigeria now feels as much pressure to go 5G as the UK does, as Singapore does. And the question is, do we need to chase 5G and all the associated costs when we only have 30% penetration with 4G? And how can we solve that problem? And I think that there will be screams of anti-competitiveness if you do certain things outside of this framework. But at the end of the day, I think there are ways in which you could thread the needle to be able to still improve broadband penetration. And I'll give one example. I think Africa will benefit from small regional ISPs who are able to connect a few base stations and perhaps connect their customers within, let's say, a 5-kilometer radius using frequencies that are called license exempt, for example. So license exempt is a kind of frequency that you don't have to pay for. So the good news is you can just put your base station in there and you can do solar grid independent electricity, and your community, you get an ISP to bring internet to your base station, and the satellite story helps there because satellite costs are crashing thanks to paradigm shift in the industry. And then he could redistribute, or she could redistribute to, let's say, 100 folks around that base station and make a half decent, the numbers now make sense. They didn't 10 years ago, but they can make a half decent business connecting the local school, the local lawyer, the local shopping plaza, the local healthcare provider, the local government officials. And you can indeed have these sort of small ISPs that are leveraging internet like Starlink or even fiber. But the trick is that last mile. You have to find different ways to provide that last mile. And there are ways to do that, but indeed, policy intervention is required.
So the numbers, some of the economic numbers that 10 years ago didn't make quite sense nowadays because of technology advancements and many other factors might make sense, and especially for even small players, right? So in rural communities, small ISPs can do this coverage, and even if the area is underserved in terms of electricity from the grid, you already have solutions that could be cost effective, solar, mini grid, off grids, whatever. So this is very interesting. So the paradigm is shifting a little bit, and one thing that I also
Please, Ivo.
no, what I also took note mentally is so a lot of technologies are being rolled out, right? And you mentioned the same pressure that Nigeria and UK feel for 5G deployment is almost the same. But you raised a small question here, which is, do we really have to push this as hard as the UK, where most people and the devices people own maybe don't even have 5G capabilities, right? And the deployment of a 5G network, at least nowadays, is higher, right? It's higher than a 4G investment, right? So this as far as I understood, this is not a very consensual topic, right? Because if there's a new technology, why use I wouldn't call 4G legacy yet, but I understand your point. So that's one of the things that resonated with me was maybe in some areas.
Can I add something? Can I add something here? Also, it's not just, and I think that in the beginning you said something like this. Telecom companies are crushed in between legacy from 2G and the GSM network, which was the primary driver for this transformation, and now the fifth generation, and probably the sixth generation in 1 or 2 years, which is going to this is going to raise the capex on every capex and opex on every x of this kind of operation. And the solution that you're saying is, okay, look, instead of investing broadly in this kind of capabilities from these big networks that are extremely expensive in terms of licensing and technology, because then you have the guys that need to operate the first line, which is 2G, the fifth line, the 4G, and let's be honest. In Africa, if you have a good 4G, if you have a good LTE, which has a large frequency and a large, I think that with quality, you have around 20 kilometers. I think it's around that, 20 to 25 kilometers with high quality. You can solve a lot of issues. And in that perspective, the next step is you need to, and as you were saying also, you need to create the conditions so that people can access that kind of broadband with the small devices. But then we will face other problems in the future. But this is very this is a problem I'm delving with right now. What is your perspective? Should we abandon legacy and forget 5G and bet all in this technology that can bring the costs down through satellite? Is that your perspective?
Yes, no, it's a great question, and absolutely not. I think that one of the issues we also have, because I have more of a satellite background, because satellite has always been associated with underserved, but we have this tendency to put satellite connectivity and fiber in different buckets and think that they are sort of one or the other and competing, which is not is certainly not the case. I think you just said something which I would like to sort of springboard from, which is, if you give an African student or business person, and we should use specifics. If you have 20 Mbps speed that is relatively consistent, and you can get about let's say between 50 and 100 gigabits of data a month, and you have access to that, and you're in a middle class home, and maybe you have 250 gigabits of data coming in around 20 Mbps, those should be the metrics from which we then decide how to deliver that. And I sit here in Abuja as I have this conversation with you. I have Starlink on my roof, and if I do a speed test now, it gives me 200 Mbps. Now, sorry, but that's great. But about 1% of Nigerians can afford $500 for the CPE. Maybe 10% can afford the monthly fee if they could ever find that one-time fee. And even me, who likes to think I'm relatively productive, I could easily use 10% of what I'm getting into my home now. I don't need 200. And I don't even know, I'm not a gamer. I missed that whole boat. So I would be happy with 20 Mbps and would still be able to have this conversation with you. So, some of our ideas are, for example, and we're doing some, I want to leave this with you too, quite important. We're doing some proof of concepts right now, where there's an organization I think a lot of called unconnected.org. They are based in the UK, and they have gotten into Starlink through their corporate social responsibility wing. And so through that, because they are sort of a non-profit working with ISPs, we are allowed, let's say, to put a Starlink dish in a low-cost base station and redistribute that connection using license-exempt technology. And what does that mean? It means, it's like we always said, it's like why Dangote is the richest man in Nigeria. He started by getting that bag of rice and that Nigerians couldn't afford, and putting them in little sachets and selling them for 10 naira. And now, if you add up all the 10 naira sachets, he's actually making more than the bag of rice, there's some irony there. But it's called the sachetization economy. So yes, indeed, take that dish no one can afford, put it in one place, redistribute using a cheaper technology, a license-exempt technology, which can also bypass all these costs associated with frequency, and then charge $30 a month, $35 a month, $25 a month, depending on the plan, and allow Nigerian local young people to run these little enclaves of connectivity, and very important, provide a support layer. If I call Starlink today and say that my modem burned, I don't hear anything back, and then eventually they ship me one from San Francisco. If MTN goes down, I just have to pray that eventually it'll connect. No one's calling me back, right? So there is this service layer needed with the ISPs that in Africa I think, works best with that local person who can quickly go out and realize you unplugged, some, mouse chewed your wire, or, it's like you had a power surge, or you need a little router to extend your connection to upstairs. And that kind of touch and feel is critical if you really want broadband to spread. Those things are taken for granted in the West with the Virgins or the AT&Ts and all these folks who do that, but it doesn't exist. It effectively doesn't exist in Africa. So it's also an opportunity. But there's a lot that needs to be, there has to be a pivot, there needs investments. and you will indeed be fighting some vested interests. But we are in a world of fighting vested interests, so this is probably a very small battle compared to some of them.
I don't know. So I think, Andrea, you tapped here into the socio-economic benefits of broadband expansion, right? You talked about, so I think we have like, I don't know, let me see. Google and Internet Finance Corporation estimated that Africa's internet economy has the potential to reach 5.2% of the continent's gross domestic product by 2025. So this was this year, right? And it has the potential of contributing more or less 712 billion dollars by 2050. So 25 years from now. So I would say my question is, in your vision, what are the most significant socioeconomic benefits that you foresee from this digital economy boom, potentially? And how can improved connectivity drive economic growth, foster innovation, and revolutionize sectors like education, healthcare, and particularly in the underserved regions that we've been talking about?
Yeah, no, I think it's good questions. A lot of them you do hear in broad senses about education, expansion, access to content. But I think I would like to come to it on two main things. One is the migration from rural to the cities. This also is talked about a lot, but I truly believe that this is a major issue because people come, I can speak for Nigeria, people come to the cities blindly, just saying, I think that I can find something here. And to the extent that people feel like they can stay in their areas where they live and make a living, I think it will really help with this, I think, very destructive move to the cities, which then have issues of security. Infrastructure cannot handle them all. So I think to the extent you have a good connection, in whatever you're doing, it means you're more likely to stay where you are. I think the other big thing is that I believe is important is infrastructure in Africa continues to be a big problem. If you want a distribution business, you don't have great roads. Electricity continues to be a challenge. Governments continue to have problems of high inefficiency for any number of reasons. So what Nigerians have been able to do with connectivity, I think, in the entertainment industry is fascinating, right? So some of the biggest stars in music in the world now are African. Everywhere I'm blessed to travel, I hear African music in the airwaves. And these folks are making hard currency because they don't rely on a road that is not maintained. They are able to leapfrog the bad infrastructure and also leapfrog government inefficiency to engage the world and make a living. That, of course, would go for outsourcing, being able to write code or some of the other things you hear about. But why I like it so much is you actually don't have to think too much for those young people or for entrepreneurs. If you give them that and you allow them to grow in spite of their governments, sorry to say, in spite of the infrastructure limitations, I think this can be very empowering. And indeed, streaming of movies, of music, all of that would never occur and they would have never had access if we still had to buy a CD or a record at a store or get it shipped. It would have been impossible for these talented artists to get their art out. Art itself, for example, is also a very big area for Africa and Nigerians. So I think the things around healthcare and the ability to get healthcare in the West, so much of healthcare now is through, they are trying to discourage you from coming to the hospital if you can. You have for $20 a month, you can get basic healthcare through Amazon. Amazon is in the health business now. All that is enabled through connectivity. So I think that there are so many ways that providing that will no question improve the lives of Africans.
Thank you. So for my next question, what do you see are the innovative technologies such as low Earth orbit satellites that we discussed previously, and also solar-powered Wi-Fi hubs, that these kind of technologies are transforming the internet connectivity in Africa? It's still in early stages, right? But
yeah,
we have like 600 million Africans that still lack reliable access to electricity. It's not that they don't have access to electricity. It's just, it's not reliable. From time to time, you can go for, 24 hours, 2 hours. And in some areas, in some regions, this is quite frequent, right? Every single month happens like an incident like this. But 600 million people, 600 million Africans, it's nearly half the continent's population right now. So how do you think, what technologies can help, transforming this connectivity? We already discussed, I think we already kind of answered this, but we already touched on the low Earth orbit satellites. We also have, I don't think the Chinese also have a constellation of satellites that are very interesting, right? These solar powered hubs. What other technologies would you say that could help transform this access to the connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones. Is what they call the backhaul, and the cost of backhaul to a location is crashing, mainly due to satellites and all those things you described. Be it Kuiper, Starlink, the Chinese will crash that price. Low cost base stations can run on solar easily. Again, my little pet peeve, if you run a 5G base station or 4G, you need much more power, and that means space also for panels. It also means more money. So these license exempt technologies also need very little power at the base station. So this would also benefit. So both those things can happen. And then, of course, like people say, the devices themselves. I mean, this is also an elephant in the room. You need your device to be able to be charged, and you need the device at a price that can be reached. But I believe that problem. I believe that if that's the only problem we have, I think that access to end user devices, as they would call them, we can solve. I think that the smartphones, the pads, the tablets, the low cost laptops. If you have a good connection, you can get a much lower cost laptop because you hardly need a hard drive. You don't need that much processing power because that can all sit somewhere else. So I truly believe that there are people working on the end user component of things, which is less of my focus. But I think, and that has to be solved. But I think that can work. I also think the idea, for example, of every student getting a Mifi device that connects to some of these technologies could also be very interesting, because a lot of Nigerian educational institutions now provide some level of connectivity as part of your school fees. They try to, but the connectivity quality is quite low. But I think it should become, as quickly as any other utility, people should get a Mifi device that they can now use to connect any number of, it gives you this sort of little hotspots, and it becomes personalized, and you can register it on a certain person. And removing the connectivity from the device while making it still nomadic or portable. I think this could also be a very interesting way in which to think about end user connectivity going forward. And you see some of that, of course, in the West, but for many reasons, they're not the number one kind of solution in the markets. Yeah, it's like a small router. Yeah, you literally, they're called Mifi devices, and they're usually, the size of a car key, a big car key or so. And they allow you to connect the devices within an area where you are. And they tend to cost, they can cost more like the $20 to $30 range. And they allow you to connect, because the number one way in which the Nigerian student connects to the internet is by tethering. The word tethering here is big. It's like you take your phone, you make your phone a hotspot, and then you tether it to some other devices. But if why have a whole phone to become a router? Your phone becomes a router, basically. So the whole point is, instead of making your phone that most people cannot afford a router, give them a little Mifi device that has only one job, and that is to connect whatever's around you. It needs power also, but once again, it needs very little power and can be charged very quickly. So, ideas like that, I think, could also make a difference.
Interesting. That drives me to my last question that I had here on my list. But I think I don't know. You tell me. I think we already kind of delved into this and discussed this, but I was while I was doing my research, for this for today's episode, I found this institution, which is the Alliance for Affordable Internet, A4AI, something like this. Not AI, artificial intelligence, but AI stands for Affordable Internet. And right now, this alliance is encouraging governments all around the world, not just Africa, okay, all around the world. And what they want to ensure is that the cost of 5 gigabytes of broadband, both mobile and fixed, okay. Initially, this project had other goals and objectives, but right now it's like they're encouraging governments to put into place policies and incentives. So 5 gigabytes of broadband, be it mobile or fixed, should not be more than 2% of the average monthly income of a person until 2026. So it's it's like 1 year away, right? This must be a reality in some regions of the world. I'm not quite sure in other areas, especially here in the continent, on the African continent. Surprisingly, some of the prices here have dropped like crazy, especially from currency devaluations, and the supervisors do not allow, right? The regulators do not allow the players to like update their prices right away. Otherwise, that could be a problem, right, for the population. But that also creates a bad incentive, which is big companies are being incentivized to not invest as much on their infrastructure as they should, right? Because they see probably their profits getting thinner and thinner when this happens, right? Not saying they don't have profits, but maybe the profits they have today are completely different from profits from 10 years ago, right? Yeah, sure. These are big investments, hundreds of millions of dollars. You don't pay them back in 3, 4, 5 years. So it's quite interesting. How do you think governments or strategies can put into place these incentives, like making broadband more accessible, be it mobile or fixed, but also, keeping the right incentives in place for the key players to keep investing in the markets, and so the businesses stay profitable enough for the countries and the regions they operate in to be, interesting enough to stay there.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think to also give some credit to the current policies, like at the regulators of a lot of countries, including Nigeria, I think there's enough in place to allow for a change in the paradigm of how connectivity happens. And I think the organization you described, for example, many times those organizations they're very heavy with the mobile operator associations who come in and have money, and you feel their influence. And I don't have any problem with the MTNs of the world, but I think that it's going to take a paradigm shift. Whatever you think of Elon Musk, he has paradigm shifted electric cars and satellite connectivity, and you need something different. I give you an example of something that I think would immediately succeed. Amazon is trying to build their own equivalent of Starlink, and they will get there very soon. If Amazon decided to become an ISP in Africa themselves and invested on the ground, not only the satellites, but also decided to make an investment on the ground of these low-cost base stations, and then created a platform, a billing platform, to which ISPs, local ISPs, and young people could buy the cheap base station, maybe on Amazon, and then install it. And there's a platform to bill your clients. They can take their little commission for you being on their platform, and then pushing that using a license-exempt technology. The amount of investment on the ground they would make compared to the $20 billion they're spending on the satellites project will be small. All right, it'll be minuscule compared to that, but it will now give them access to the last mile and access to the customer. They will now own the customer, and Africa would be connected in the next 5 to 10 years with broadband the way we are seeing it. This is an example of a disruption that could occur and needs to occur. I don't think the answer is coming from Airtel. I'm sorry. They do a great job connecting people with WhatsApp. They will continue to do that with phones. But for home and business broadband, you need an entirely different kind of company. You could also have a bunch of people from Telco start their own company and build a different, quote unquote, different kind of company. But this is the kind of thing that is going to make the change. I'm trying to get that word out a little bit myself. And I believe it will take that kind of change. And I put the pressure a little bit on the private sector. I think they need to think about a little bit more outside the box about how to get to the end user. And I think it will come. I think it will come, but it will take some different kind of approach.
So let me just one second. This will be a paradigm shift in terms of business models for telecoms. So what used to take billions of dollars will be done without infrastructure, probably without licensing for the frequencies, but with a much more local footprint, because the interest in the end is not telecom in a broader sense, but how to connect people and get a market.
Yeah,
and that's what you're saying.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's coming because the telcos are losing money now. They like you well said, Ivo. People can't pay what the telcos need to stay profitable, and they're bleeding. And MTN had its first loss in several years in Nigeria. So the numbers are not adding up anymore. So I think that there will be change, and hopefully we can somehow be part of it in some small way.
That's so interesting. Here, for instance, in Angola, one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, still the telecom operator Unitel. This last year, they published their annual report, and for the first time, only from operational profits, they only had like $8 million of operating profits. They had more profits, but resulting from other instruments, right, like investments and other things.
Right.
But people here discussed and been discussing that for, I don't know if it was 2012 or something. Unitel was the best or the most profitable telecom company in the world. So for every 100 kwanzas that people bought of airtime, right, kwanzas or nairas, but to make it simple, they like had a pure profit of 60. Okay, so it was super profitable company, and through the years, these investments have been dropping, and also the profits. You touch on a very interesting and cool aspect, which is if anyone can do this, like decentralized access to things, Amazon might be one of the key players. I think they do this kind of business model, not on telecoms, but like you can set up your small business, right? They can give you a kit, and you can have your small delivery company, right, and do deliveries Amazon, right? They do.
That's why that's why I didn't mention Starlink, not because of anything against them, but because they don't have that downstream business model that in some ways already exists at Amazon. So Amazon doesn't operate its delivery service in certain countries because the roads are bad, right? And they've decided it doesn't make sense. But here, they don't have to worry about the road. They just have to put the base station in, protect it, put their device, redistribute. So let's get Amazon Kuiper on the next podcast.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. And I think this strategy, divide to conquer. No, it's like a divide to conquer. Divide, not put people one against each other, but listen, we can have we can profit more if we don't try to get the whole cake right at the beginning, right? Let's give people the opportunity to be on the ground and do their share, of profits, and that will benefit us at the end even more than try to do it all alone. That's so interesting. We're coming to an end today. Okay, we already covered several and critical topics, such as the integration of satellites and fiber technologies that they help bridge the digital divide, as well as the role of government policies in fostering local ISPs and the socio-economic impact of broadband on education, healthcare, and economic growth. Diseye, thank you. Diseye, thank you so much for your vision, for addressing all the innovative technologies that we can put into place, right? Potential public partnerships that we can foster. Thank you for sharing your expertise and passion with us today. And also thank you, a big thank you to our listeners for tuning in. So stay connected as we continue this season of Africa Tech Talks with more incredible guests and discussions on everything from infrastructure like data centers and telecoms to cutting-edge advancements in artificial intelligence and venture capital. Until next time, keep exploring, innovating, and driving Africa's tech future forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.